Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Uddhav Gupta. Uddhav, welcome.
Thank you, Sugata. Lovely to be on this podcast with you.
Amazing. So, we met a few years ago when you were at Ingram or CloudBlue. Ingram is a customer of ours. So through that, I connected with you. And we've been trying to get you on this thing for about, several months. I'm glad that your schedule worked out. But before we get going, it would be great if you'd please take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So, Uddhav Gupta, always been a native of the San Francisco Bay Area. Um, and my past jobs have been at companies like SAP, where I was a product person, led number of products there. And it's always been around, including the ecosystem as a part of the product journey. Pure Storage, which is a fantastic product around the storage as a service business and 100% channel business. So again, lovely crossover there with the ecosystem. And then my recent gig was basically at CloudBlue, which is a business unit within Ingram, and creating a monetization platform for the channel. And now I'm on a sabbatical after a successful exit of CloudBlue.
So Uddhav, you and I have kind of gone back and forth about this whole notion about, especially when we are having lunch a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this notion of platforms, right? And you're very
Right.
passionate about that dimension. Before we get into the ecosystem of part of the platform, can you tell us a little bit, what is a platform in your mind? What was it maybe a decade ago? What is it now? And where do you think that thing is going? What is a platform?
It is a question that I spend a lot of time thinking these days, right? And a lot of the conversation, I remember you and me meeting over lunch, we were kind of talking about what a platform is. A lot of my conversations these days are what is a platform? I fundamentally think the definition of platform is evolving every quarter, every month, every day, right? There was a time when, product and platform were kind of synonymous. People were thinking, oh, you either have a product or you have a platform. Or in many cases, people kind of took their products and called it platforms. But I think over the period of time, the fundamental meaning of a platform has changed. It's no longer a product feature. It's now become an interaction, a match of maybe transactions between two vendors being facilitated through a platform, or a collaboration between two parties where, two vendors can come together and basically think about how they co-sell into an account. It's also extended to where, companies that have very rich domain specific knowledge are now exposing themselves as platforms for their ecosystem to start coming and building applications, integrations, extensions on top of their platform. So I think platform is becoming more and more uh, center to how enterprise software businesses are evolving. And I think it's very important for all companies to basically stop and think about one thing. What can we build for our customers? And then when you start basically thinking about that, you start thinking about what is the infrastructure that they can provide to customers, partners, and the developers to build that value together. And when you start doing that's when you realize what your platform story is for your enterprise.
So if we kind of try to go into nuts and bolts, and you can pick an example of one that you may like. But before I go there, I want to kind of preface this. A couple of decades ago, I'm going to date myself. Scott McNally, who was CEO of Sun Microsystem, in one of his developer conference, he said this, that over a period of time, products become features. So don't go
Mhm.
build products, go build platforms. And at that time, and maybe even over the last decade, it kind of meant you have your own product coming out of a broad infrastructure that has tool sets that allows others to build upon, whether it's an extension of a service, whether an extension of as an ISV to plug into your infrastructure or applications, whether it's having partners to go customize and build as system integrators. So there are three or four dimensions that when people looked at and that kind of define platforms. In last couple of days, I was at a conference and I saw one of the CVP from Microsoft speak, and she said, our goal, Microsoft's goal, is to become the platform of platforms.
Mhm.
So, like, we're going from Mother Earth to to a universe, to a galaxy. I mean, we're going to a different level of definition. So, can you take an example of that you have lived in, maybe a decade ago? Where is that now, and how is that evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the examples that I was super close to was the platform that we built at SAP. called SAP Cloud Platform. Some of you may now recognize that as SAP's Business Transformation Platform, or BTP, right? Um, but the whole idea there was, as SAP was starting to bring all these different cloud products together in house through acquisitions, organically or inorganically, they needed to basically start making a common language, a common way of interfacing between these different applications if they wanted to really win the intelligence suite game, right? And they built this thing called the cloud platform. And the cloud platform was rich with a whole bunch of services, not designed to basically build any kind of apps, but take the domain knowledge, the domain expertise that's within SAP and expose it out as industry vertical applications. These could be like extensions, these could be integrations, these could be like mobile applications, these could be IoT applications, this could be anything, right? It's kind of almost like creating those apps for your business gaps, kind of a thing, right? So I think that was a very great story that SAP built, and it's basically served them very well. Another example I could think about is ServiceNow, right? You mentioned platform of platforms, and kind of ServiceNow's thinking was around that, right? They wanted to basically be the platform of platforms with the Now platform, right? And they recognized the power that they had in terms of managing all the workflows within enterprises. And they recognized the opportunity of creating a platform on top with the rich ecosystem that they had to now basically go ahead and allow users to define their own workflows that could span across multiple different systems. So that's an opportunity where you take your domain expertise and translate yourself into a platform, right? A third example I could think about is what Ingram did with Xvantage, right? They took their domain knowledge of 40 years of reseller channel business and they converted it into a very rich platform called Xvantage. And now they're opening it up for the ecosystem to basically build their own value added apps on top of it. So these are the different things where, a platform story emerges organically when you spot the domain expertise you have and the value you can basically create by extending the domain expertise to your ecosystem.
Let's go to the second word, which is ecosystem, which is part of many of these platforms. And at least personally, I'm not aware of any platform that doesn't include ecosystems. Maybe there are. But in your mind, like just looking at Ingram is a great example of that. When you look at distribution as a core enabler of any platforms, extending it, whether they're focused on the tail, whether it's focused on, hardware as a service, there's a whole transformation that has happened distribution because how these platforms like marketplaces and et cetera evolved around distribution, right? So can you double click a little bit about, the ecosystem part, but more so going a little deeper on the distribution part? Where is it today? Where do you think it's going?
So I see a couple of things that's happening in the distributor space, right? The distributor space is a very unique operating model if you think about it, right? You are basically trying to enable multiple tiers of channel through a distribution network. Now, often you have the challenge of, do you start servicing the customers directly or do you maintain the channel, right? Do you basically start providing the initial sale through the channel, but then do you start basically looking at delivering value added services directly? How do you educate the multiple tiers of your channel on new value added services that you're creating as a distributor and bring it downstream? So, the number of things that basically dynamically keep changing on the distribution network depending upon the type of product that's being sold. If it's a hardware product, it's a different kind of a distribution value chain. If it's a software product, it's a very different distribution value chain. If it's a cloud infrastructure, it's a very different value chain. And now if it's AI, it's a very different distribution value chain, right? So thinking about building a platform that allows the two ends of your network to extract value becomes very interesting of a problem statement. On one side, you want to basically create a platform that provides your ISVs the insights that they need across these multiple different channels. On the other side, without basically exposing the data from one distributor to another distributor, one reseller to another distributor. So the reseller, you want to expose the collective insights that you're getting from all those transactions going through the platform to the resellers, to the channel partners, so they can actually start making good decisions, right? Only a platform approach that allows people to build their own insights, build their own apps, build their own extensions will allow you to successfully do that without breaking that trust, right? And so I think, you said ecosystem is a big word of platform, but also trust is another big word of the platform.
So let's go back to distribution and the way it used to be and some of the attributes that you're defining that were not there before. So when I think about a couple of decades ago, or maybe even so a decade ago, distribution roughly meant a bank and a warehouse where really helped you to scale globally, right? That you could not reach. They, of course, other than bringing in their own partners, but they also brought in competency. Now they were very hardware. That's why the warehouse comes in focus, right? As SaaS came into play over the past decade or so, and proliferation of tools and applications happened, and business services happened, SIs grew. Talk to us a little bit about the core success enablers or parameters or KPIs. Instead of inventory churn or working capital, there's the predominant metric for distribution. How did it evolve over the last decade, and what are the success KPIs for distribution today?
The business has evolved dramatically and it's become a very different business than, as you mentioned, selling hardware and servers now with the cloud world. First, big change from capex oriented business to more of an opex oriented business, right? Big change from customers basically buying something they deploy and forget for the next 4 or 5 years, whether it be laptops or servers, to more cloud products now, where they're signing up for a year-long contract. If they don't like one, they switch to another one. Gone is a world where you basically provided, refunds and returns and stocking and restocking services. To now, more you're basically looking at providing customer support, customer success kind of services. And the big difference was a distributor earlier was basically looking at the value add coming from bundling of products. The value add now is basically through value added services that allow the customer to recognize and realize the value from their cloud investments a lot more faster, right? So I think what's changing is, and the margin profiles are also changing. With cloud, the margin profile becomes a lot more simpler for the distributor than it was in the other kind of server businesses. But redeploying that margin, strength that they get by, the economies of scale, the large number of customers they have now, and translating that into value-added services that are going to basically drive further adoption, further utilization, further realization of what's already been deployed and what can be deployed becomes important. And this is why you start seeing the concept of ecosystem marketplaces becoming a more open-ended uh, avenue as compared to the closed avenue that it was before for distributors, right? Now you have to basically go down the path of you're selling infrastructure. Let's say, take any cloud infrastructure. You need to drive the utilization of the infrastructure because you have skin in that game. And now you have to basically create a marketplace with a very rich ecosystem of, products that can basically drive that utilization. A very rich ecosystem of partners that can help you drive that utilization. A very rich set of value-added services that a customer can out of the box like utilizing to run and create value from the services deployed. And I think this thing, if you think about hardware becoming much smaller in cloud transaction wise, but much larger in terms of momentum, the AI wave is going to take that to an even larger momentum, right? So it's going to be a very interesting time for distribution, reseller, and channel businesses as they catch on to the AI wave and go beyond just basically selling infrastructure to value added capabilities that match the AI wave.
So let's bring in those two or three words. You talked about marketplace, you talked about margins, you talked about AI. I'll come to AI last, but let's start with the margin story of distribution. It has been challenging over the last couple of decades to maintain certain amount of margin for distribution, and the way they did that is through acquisition and scale, right?
Right.
They had a P&L advantage, and also become the largest aggregator as an alternative to a lot of these online players that sell direct. But when you look at the 10Ks of most of the distributors, the margins are minuscule compared to when you look at their net income, look at their free cash flow, compared to what's happening with players that are in the marketplace, especially the SaaS platform driven players, right? So
Right.
if you had to kind of play out that narrative as a challenge. I have heard alternative theories that these marketplaces are going to end up buying distribution because
Mhm.
because just the economies of scale that is needed. So where do you think the macro forces, the meta forces are driving distribution towards? What does that business look like?
That's a fantastic question. Look, I think over the period of time, the way distribution and channels work has changed, right? So, a good example of that was if you think about 5 or 6 years ago, if you look at even the hyperscaler marketplaces, right, they were designed for a one tier transaction model, right? So, you go as a customer, you can directly buy it from the hyperscaler, you get billed by the hyperscaler, etc. Hyperscalers themselves have realized that in order for them to be a good distribution channel, they cannot basically cut the existing channel and distribution network. So the hyperscalers themselves are starting to not only use these channels to basically sell their infrastructure services, but when you get to the hyperscaler marketplaces, they've created some really good programs like the CPPO and the DSO programs to bring the channel and the distributed community along with them in that journey. So I think the question still is open whether, eventually does the marketplaces replace the distributors on the channel, or the marketplaces become the new transactional avenues with the distributors and the channels playing a very important role. And if I was a betting man, I'm betting on the latter, because that is what will give you the scale that they need without creating a conflict in the market.
So going back to the sales motion, you talked about, distribution came from this one tier model and now sort of a multi-tier model. Let's bring in sort of the other dimension, whereas we move from hardware that you sell a product every 4 years to services, this whole, winning by design multi-model comes in, that you have a pre-sales funnel, but you also have a post-sale funnel. And then, Jay McBain talks about these 6 to 7 partners or 6.3 partners, these life stages of the customer relationship, servicing the customer, and therefore this whole buzzword that's evolving, co-sell, co-keep, co-grow, etc. How does distribution play in that, moving from one tier to multi-tier, just pre-transaction, to go to this life cycle model? What does their, what happens to their competency? What happens to their infrastructure? How do they change and evolve to that?
Again, a very interesting juncture that we are in, right? If you think about it, earlier, I mean, the co-selling, the co-bundling, the co-growing concept was always there in the network, but it was in a different way. It was more like, bundle, resell, packaging concept. Now it's basically moved to more of a positioning concept, right? Where a distributor or reseller needs to really think about how they can start solving for outcomes. So you got a finance customer and you're basically not selling technology, not selling speeds and feeds to the customer. You are selling outcomes to the customer. And then doing that outcomes, you're never going to be able to do that with one set of products. You have to get very dynamic in nature in terms of what you're going to package for the customer, depending upon what the customer uses. So in a world where it was very simple to take a laptop and basically take, Microsoft Office on top of it and take a few other productivity software and say this is a bundled offer and go buy this, you're moving more to like, almost a Porsche model where you can actually go on the website and start building whatever you need. Uh, a co-sell model will emerge very similar. Customers will go and say, this is the outcomes I'm looking for. Okay, distributor, give me a solution. At that point of time, it's not going to be possible for them to basically build the standard mechanisms of pre-tested, pre-validated packages. So this will have to get more in a co-sell selling motion with partners that have actually built on the stack that the distributor is actually offering. So it becomes very interesting in terms of the dynamics of how a distributor is starting to go to market, how they're taking their portfolio planning to the market, how they're taking their partnerships to the market, and how they're basically taking their margin profile from their sales that's happening in a co-sell, in a referral, in a co-grow model back into their P&L.
So if you look at the other big word that you just said, outcome,
Yeah.
You are trying to drive towards outcome. You need to understand what's driving that. Y is equal to FX, right? What's driving the outcome? And the moment you focus on the FX part, you have to understand attribution, right? Through that whole thing. So where is distribution capability today to understand, not so much identify, as you said, get a laptop, put Windows Office, put Microsoft, McAfee antivirus on it, Adobe Photo, whatever that bundle was. Now, if you're trying to go drive outcomes, saying, okay, I'm working in the printing segment and I'm going to drive up productivity by 3.6%, you have to understand a lot more, right? And
Yeah.
so, where is that capability today? Where is data today? And my last question is AI going to help or make it worse or make it better? Like, can you go through those three parts?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a number of things in there that let's unpack those, right? So, first thing, if you look at the entire channel business, whether you're a distributor, you're a reseller, you're a telco, that is basically servicing end enterprises, everybody is starting to build what they call solution practices within their organizations. And these solution practices are kind of look us very similar to how enterprise companies like SAP and Microsoft, etc., were building the solution teams to solve the customer's business problem with a packaged solution. They're kind of thinking of the same way, but in this case, they're basically thinking of solutions that are bundled through co-sell selling motions or even resell selling motions. That's number one. By doing that, they're starting to basically look and saying, how can I basically drive GTM ops at a predicted rate? How can I basically drive RevOps? And what are the packages that need it? What can I do for FinOps, right? So people are starting to think that way and build those partnerships there. The second piece is it's not just about going ahead and building and delivering those solutions. A lot of the resellers are kind of becoming more and more leaning towards the value added resellers where they are basically buying stakes into those outcomes, which is why they're focusing heavily on customer success, which is why they're focusing heavily on customer support, right? To drive. In that wave, they're also partnering a lot with SI vendors to go ahead and basically deliver SI offerings as a part of this solution. So that ecosystem is starting to become very big, which is kind of missing in the classic distribution reseller model. And the last thing I think with AI coming in, it's basically twofold, Sugata. One is, of course, it's basically helping enterprises start realize new scenarios, which is then basically helping the distributors come in and now position a new catalog of capabilities that they did not have before. But the second thing that's also doing is from a distributor and a reseller standpoint, AI is helping build tools that are allowing them to basically reach those outcomes for customers with a much better margin profile. So I think AI is helping from both those waves. And then the last part is we're still at this juncture where we're seeing a lot of use of AI in terms of infrastructure, which is great. We're seeing a lot of use cases in terms of tools that are enabling people to build their own applications and solutions using AI. What still we have to wait and see is as SaaS companies basically start building AI capabilities, how will they monetize that and how will they transact that through the channel? Whether will it be the same mechanism that they're selling today, or will it be a different mechanism where customers are just opting in directly and doing in-app purchases within the platform? And then how does that feed back to the entire distribution reseller channel will be very interesting to see. So I think it's still, the jury's not out on how in-app purchases within AI applications, which is becoming more and more prevalent, will impact the distribution and the reseller channel.
But great point. So I'm going to come back on a follow-on question, right? When we're having lunch, you said you're an AI optimist. So looking forward, let's say, maybe 18 to 24 months horizon, which seems very far away in today's AI cycles. Where do you think the tractions are? Where do you think when it comes to, these platform ecosystems and outcome-driven journey that we're all kind of moving towards? Where do you see, and you're connecting to a very large number of CXOs at very large companies, where do you see things that, what's real, what's happening, which direction is it moving?
So, in most of my conversations, Sugata, what I'm seeing happen is AI right now. is being broken up into three journeys. Okay. The first journey is more about experiences. How do we basically use AI to improve the experience of X, Y, and Z? Okay. That is great, but that is not what's translating back into revenue for many of these customers. The second piece that's basically being used, where AI is being predominantly used, is operational efficiencies. Where they're saying, okay, like short term, what are the mundane tasks that people are doing that we can basically, outsource to AI in many ways, right? The question everybody is asking is, okay, I do that for a year, I do that for two. At some point, I've reached the scale of efficiency using AI. Now what, right? Uh, the third scenario, which everybody is super interested in, most of the conversation that I'm having on, is how do you use AI to do revenue generation use cases? Where can AI come and unlock that incremental revenue from me that I do not have today, right? And that's where you'll see a lot of CIOs, CXOs starting to focus their teams on and start building AI center of excellences that will be 100% focused not on operational efficiencies, not on experience development, but on creating new revenue streams, right? So like when in CloudBlue, we basically went ahead and said, how do we want to use AI? We came up with things like, dynamic pricing scenarios, which would basically create a new value add for the customer. We went up with things like, revenue reconciliation scenarios, which would allow customers to protect their margin, thereby increasing the revenue, right? We went things with like, catalog management, which was not an operational efficiency, but how could they basically onboard new SKUs and new things into the catalog much faster, helping grow their revenue, right? So those kind of scenarios that will unlock new revenue is what people will be forcing their AI teams to look at. But until we get to that point, which I think is probably 3 to 6 months out, a lot of what CXOs are trying to do is build that install base, build that knowledge, build that domain expertise within the company by letting people tinker around with whatever projects they feel like from an AI standpoint. My take is over a period of time, most of these AI projects will die because they'll get replaced with native capabilities within the SaaS applications that these were being built for, or they will basically kind of start fizzing out because maintaining these multiple different AI apps will become an issue. And so you'll start basically getting to a point where every customer is going to basically start having a platform, exposing the domain expertise into the platform, and forcing people to standardize the way they basically build their applications on AI. And there'll be a lot more governance, a lot more standards, a lot more of guardrails that will come not to prevent people from building the solutions, but coaching people on how to build the solutions, right? So anybody that's playing in that space of creating guardrails, creating the framework of how enterprises should build using AI, I think are going to basically be the winners of this next phase of ecosystem journey and
That's
platform journey.
amazing. That is amazing, Uddhav. I'd love to have you back on this last part that you just framed. I think there's a level of clarity that you have. I have not heard that from a lot of people. So I know you have to go. We're in a rush today, but thank you for being here. I want to, bring you back and deep dive on that last piece, that how it actually evolved in these enterprises. I think that'll be an amazing story to talk about.
I would love to be back anytime, Sugata.
Thank you.